Mom's sick, so I came to work in her place. The tiny voice drifted across Dominic Marchetti's private office with such quiet honesty that every conversation stopped instantly. The bodyguards guarding the double doors exchanged confused looks. The accountants froze. Even Dominic's most trusted lieutenant lowered the file he had been reading. Standing beside the enormous mahogany desk was a little girl no older than 7. She wore an oversized cleaning apron that nearly reached her ankles, her brown ponytail slightly messy, one sneaker damp from the morning rain. In one hand, she carried a spray bottle. In the other, an old cleaning cloth folded as neatly as if someone had carefully taught her to respect every tool she owned. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She wasn't afraid enough to run. She simply looked up at the most feared man in the city and waited for an answer. One guard instinctively stepped toward her. "Boss, I'll remove her." No. Dominic's single word stopped him. The room became even quieter. Instead of ordering the child out, instead of demanding to know who had made such an impossible mistake, Dominic slowly walked around his desk until he stood directly in front of her. Then, to the complete disbelief of everyone watching, the ruthless Mafia boss lowered himself onto one knee, so they were eye to eye. What happened after that would change not only his own life, but the lives of everyone connected to that little girl. Stay with me until the end, because this isn't simply a story about a Mafia boss. It's the story of how one child's love for her mother awakened humanity in a man the world believed had none. Dominic Nico Marchetti was a man whose reputation reached places he had never visited. Business executives feared disappointing him. Politicians answered his phone calls before those of their own advisors. Within his headquarters, every employee understood one simple rule: do your job well. Never waste his time. Never give him a reason to notice you. That morning had begun no differently. Meetings filled his schedule. Security reports covered his desk. Outside, gray clouds rolled over the skyline, while rain tapped softly against the tall office windows. Everything moved with perfect discipline, until one tiny pair of footsteps echoed through the hallway. No one knew how the child had managed to reach the private floor. The security checkpoints should have stopped her. The elevators required authorization. The guard station outside Dominic's office never allowed unexpected visitors. Yet, somehow, there she stood, small enough that the edge of Dominic's desk nearly reached her shoulders. She held an old spray bottle against her chest, as though it were something valuable. Her fingers were red from gripping it too tightly. Dominic studied her without speaking. There was a faint streak of dust across one cheek. The sleeves of the cleaning apron had been rolled several times to keep them from covering her hands. Despite everything around her, the armed guards, the expensive artwork, the polished marble floors, she remained remarkably calm, not fearless, just determined. "What is your name?" Dominic finally asked. "Sophia." She hesitated before adding quietly, "But everyone calls me Sophia." "And how old are you?" "I'm 7. He nodded once. "Do you know where you are?" "Yes, sir." "And why are you here?" Sophia looked down at the folded cloth in her hands before answering. "My mom cleans here." Another pause. She got really sick. She couldn't get out of bed. I didn't want her to lose her job, so I came instead. No one moved. Dominic had spent decades listening to men lie. He could hear fear, greed, manipulation, desperation. But what he heard in this little girl's voice was something entirely different. Responsibility. Far too much responsibility for someone her age. One of the guards quietly whispered, "Should I call child services?" Dominic ignored him. Instead, he noticed something almost no one else would have. The girl's stomach growled. It was soft, almost impossible to hear. But he heard it. "When did you eat?" Sophia looked embarrassed. "I haven't. Mom made breakfast yesterday. I wanted to save the rest for her." For a brief moment, Dominic couldn't remember the last time anyone had answered him with such complete honesty. He looked toward the elderly housekeeper, standing frozen in the doorway. "Maria." "Yes, Mr. Marchetti." "Please bring breakfast." "Enough for 2. The old woman blinked in surprise before hurrying away. Minutes later, she returned carrying warm pancakes, scrambled eggs, fruit, and a glass of milk. Sophia smiled politely. "Thank you." But instead of eating, she carefully placed a tray on the corner of the desk. "I should clean first. My mom says work comes before breaks." A few employees quietly wiped their eyes. Dominic simply watched her. She sprayed the desk, folded the cloth exactly in half, moved it across the polish wood in slow, careful lines. Every movement had obviously been taught by someone who took pride in honest work. She wasn't pretending. She truly believed she was saving her mother's job. For several long minutes, the most feared man in the city said absolutely nothing. He simply watched. And somewhere beneath years of violence, power, and loneliness, a memory he thought had died long ago slowly began to return. It was a memory of a frightened little boy who had once believed that if he worked hard enough, maybe life would finally become kinder. Dominic looked at the child standing in front of him and quietly made a decision that would alter every plan he had for the rest of the day. He closed the folder containing $1 billion business deal. "Cancel my meetings." His chief of security looked stunned. "All of them, sir?" "Every single one." Dominic picked up his coat before turning back to Sophia. "Finish your breakfast. Then we're going to visit your mother." Neither of them realized it yet, but before the sun set that evening, 3 lives would begin changing forever. Sophia waited until Dominic gave the smallest nod before she finally reached for the spray bottle. She handled it with surprising familiarity, wrapping both little hands around the neck of the bottle before twisting the nozzle toward the polished mahogany desk. The faint hiss of cleaning solution seemed impossibly loud inside the silent office. No one dared interrupt her. Dominic remained standing beside the desk, his expression unreadable, while the dozen people who had filled the room only moments earlier watched from a respectful distance. His security chief, Gabriel Romano, had seen his boss negotiate million-dollar deals without blinking, had watched him stare down rival crime families without flinching, but he'd never seen him quietly observe a child with such complete attention. Sophia folded the cleaning cloth into a perfect square, not because anyone had told her to, because someone else had. She wiped the desk slowly, making neat overlapping strokes from one corner to the other. Every few seconds she paused, leaned down until her face was only inches from a glossy wood, checking carefully for streaks before moving on. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't pretending. She genuinely believed this mattered. Dominic noticed every detail. The way she stood on the tips of her sneakers whenever she couldn't quite reach the center of the desk, the determined wrinkle between her eyebrows, the tiny bite mark on her lower lip whenever she concentrated. She couldn't have weighed more than 50 pounds, yet she attacked the work with the seriousness of someone carrying the weight of an entire family. Across the room, Maria, the elderly housekeeper, quietly dabbed at her eyes with the edge of her apron. "I've never," she whispered to Gabriel. He answered just as softly, "I know." Neither of them finished the sentence. There were no words for what they were witnessing. Dominic walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, but didn't look outside. Instead, the reflection in the glass showed him the little girl carefully dusting every corner of his office. She reminded him of someone. At first, a memory refused to surface. Then it came all at once. A cramped apartment, a leaking ceiling, a frightened 10-year-old boy kneeling on a cold kitchen floor long before sunrise. His mother had scrubbed restaurant kitchens for 16 hours a day. His father, already sinking deeper into the criminal world, rarely came home without bringing fear through the front door. On the mornings when his mother was too exhausted to stand, young Dominic had quietly washed the dishes before school. He remembered stretching onto his toes, exactly the way Sophia was doing now. He remembered thinking that if he worked hard enough, if he stayed quiet enough, maybe his mother wouldn't look so tired. He had never told anyone, not even himself. Some memories survived only because they stayed buried, until a 7-year-old girl unknowingly dug them back up. Dominic closed his eyes for the briefest moment. He hadn't thought about those mornings in more than 30 years. Power had erased many things. Money had erased even more. But neither had erased the feeling of being a child who believed adults depended on him. When he opened his eyes again, Sophia had moved to the bookshelf lining the wall. She carefully lifted each framed photograph one at a time before dusting underneath it. Her movements were incredibly gentle. She treated every object as though breaking it would somehow disappoint her mother. One frame caught her attention. She stared at the old black-and-white photograph for a moment before looking toward Dominic. "Is this your family?" Every guard in the room stiffened. No one asked Dominic Marchetti personal questions. Ever. Dominic walked over and looked at the photograph. It showed a much younger version of himself standing beside his parents decades earlier. His mother smiled warmly. His father didn't. "Yes," Dominic answered quietly. "They're your mom and dad?" "They were." Sophia looked back at the picture. "They look nice." Dominic didn't answer immediately. "My mother was." The little girl seemed to accept that answer without asking another question. Children, he realized, had an extraordinary ability to sense which doors should remain closed. She returned the frame exactly where she'd found it before continuing her work. After another few minutes, she noticed a tiny fingerprint near the edge of one of the windows. She frowned. Standing on her tiptoes, she stretched as high as she could, but the mark remained just beyond her reach. Without thinking, Dominic stepped forward. "Here." He took the spray bottle from her hands. She looked up, worried. "I'm sorry. I missed it." "No." He sprayed the glass once before handing the bottle back. "You just couldn't reach." Sophia smiled faintly. "I'll be taller next year." Something unexpectedly warm tugged at the corner of Dominic's mouth. "So I've been told." Gabriel stared in disbelief. Was that a joke from Dominic Marchetti? He wasn't the only one wondering. Maria quietly looked toward the ceiling, whispering a grateful prayer under her breath. Sophia finished cleaning the window with slow, careful circles before stepping back to inspect her work. Satisfied, she nodded to herself. "My mom says if you leave one dirty spot, people stop noticing all the clean ones." Dominic felt those words settle heavily inside him. He'd spent his entire life believing something remarkably similar. One mistake, one weakness, one moment of mercy in his world. People forgot every good decision and remembered only the bad ones. How strange, he thought, that a child had learned the same lesson through cleaning while he had learned it through violence. The office remained silent except for the soft movements of the cloth against polished wood. No ringing phones. No interrupted meetings. No whisper reports from a security team. For nearly 15 minutes, one of the busiest men in the city simply watched a little girl clean, not because the office needed cleaning, but because she needed someone to see that her effort mattered. When she finally finished, Sophia folded the cloth into a neat square exactly as she'd unfolded it. She tightened the cap on the spray bottle, wiped away a tiny drop of cleaner that had landed on the desk, and let out a quiet breath of satisfaction. "There," she said softly. "I think Mom would say I did okay." Dominic looked around the spotless office, then back at the child whose small shoulders carried burdens no 7-year-old should ever know. For years, people called him ruthless, untouchable, even heartless. They weren't entirely wrong. The world had taught him that compassion was a weakness enemies exploited. But standing in front of Sophia Ruiz, watching her beam with pride over a job she never should have had to do, he felt something inside him begin to crack. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It was quieter than that, like ice beginning to melt after a very long winter. And though no one in the room realized it yet, Dominic Marchetti had already made a decision. He would never allow this little girl to believe she had to carry the weight of the world alone again. Dominic picked up his overcoat from the back of his chair and slipped it on with the same measured precision that marked everything he did. Around him, the office remained unusually quiet, as though no one wanted to disturb the fragile moment that had settled over the room. Sophia carefully tucked the cleaning cloth into the pocket of her oversized apron and reached for the spray bottle. "Ready?" Dominic asked. She nodded, though the excitement in her eyes was tempered by something older than a 7-year-old should have known. "We can really go see Mom?" "We can." Her face brightened for the first time that morning. "I promised I'd come back." "And you always keep your promises?" She answered without hesitation. "My mom says promises are expensive. If you make one, you have to pay for it." Dominic couldn't help but admire the wisdom hidden inside such simple words. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." Sophia smiled proudly. "She is." As they walked toward the elevator, every employee they passed stepped aside. Some bowed their heads to Dominic. Others couldn't stop staring at the little girl walking beside him. No one had ever seen the boss escort anyone himself, especially not a child carrying a spray bottle. Outside, the rain had eased into a light drizzle. A sleek black sedan waited beneath the covered entrance. Gabriel hurried to open the rear door, expecting Dominic to take his usual seat in the back alone. Instead, Dominic looked at Sophia. "You first." She climbed carefully onto the leather seat, her feet dangling several inches above the floor. Dominic sat beside her. Gabriel paused for the briefest moment before quietly closing the door. During the drive, neither of them spoke much. The city drifted past the rain-speckled windows. Traffic lights reflected across wet pavement. People hurried beneath umbrellas, too busy to notice the expensive sedan gliding through the streets. Sophia rested the spray bottle in her lap like something precious. Dominic glanced toward her. "You've been holding that all morning." She looked down at it. "It belongs to Mom. You could leave it behind." She shook her head immediately. She saved for a long time to buy it. Dominic frowned slightly. "It isn't expensive. For us it was." Her answer carried no bitterness, only truth. He looked out the window again. There had been a time when he knew exactly what she meant. Somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten. The hospital rose into view several minutes later, its gray concrete walls softened by rows of flowering trees outside the entrance. As soon as the car stopped, Sophia was already reaching for the door. "Easy," Dominic said gently. "No running." She nodded obediently. Inside, the smell of disinfectant replaced the scent of rain. Nurses moved briskly through bright hallways, while monitors beeped steadily behind closed doors. Gabriel spoke quietly with the receptionist before returning. "Fourth floor, respiratory wing." Dominic thanked him with a slight nod. When the elevator doors opened, Sophia suddenly slowed. Her confident little steps disappeared. She reached out instinctively, without realizing it. Her small fingers wrapped around the sleeve of Dominic's coat. He looked down. "You nervous? Was she still sick? We'll face it together." She nodded. Somehow those 4 words seemed enough. Room 418 sat near the end of the hallway. The door stood slightly open. Dominic knocked softly before entering. Elena Ruiz lay propped against white pillows, an oxygen tube beneath her nose, and N4 connected to the back of one hand. She looked younger than he had expected, perhaps 32. Dark hair framed a tired face that carried the unmistakable exhaustion of someone who had spent years surviving rather than living. A worn paperback Bible rested on the bedside table beside a plastic cup of water, and a pair of reading glasses held together with clear tape. The moment she saw Sophia, tears immediately filled her eyes. "Sophia." The little girl ran carefully to the bedside. "I'm okay, Mommy." "Oh, sweetheart." Elena hugged her tightly before pulling back just enough to inspect her face. "Were you scared?" "A little." Then guilt crossed the woman's face. "You left Mrs. Alvarez's apartment, didn't you?" Sophia lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't want you to lose your job." Elena closed her eyes briefly, fighting back emotion. "Oh, my beautiful girl." She stroked Sophia's hair. "You never have to carry that burden." Only then did Elena notice the tall man standing quietly near the doorway. Her expression changed instantly. Confusion, embarrassment, concern. "You must be Dominic Marchetti." She immediately tried to sit straighter despite the pain. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Marchetti. There was no one else to watch Sophia. I never would have let her come if I'd known. I understand." "No," Elena insisted softly. "You shouldn't have had to deal with this. My employees rely on me to show up. I've never missed a shift." Dominic believed her. There was pride in her voice, not arrogance. Simply the quiet dignity of someone who had built her life on reliability. "I reviewed your employment file." She looked surprised. "You've worked at my estate for nearly 6 years. 5 years, 9 months. She corrected herself automatically. "I started in October." Dominic noticed she knew the exact date, not because she loved the job, because it had mattered enough to remember. "You've never been late." "No." "You've never filed a complaint." "No." "You've never requested a raise." A faint smile touched her lips. "I figure if I worked hard enough, someone might notice eventually." The irony struck Dominic harder than she realized. She had worked inside one of his properties for almost 6 years. He had never known her name. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Dominic noticed a chart hanging beside her bed. Severe bacterial pneumonia, complications from prolonged exhaustion, malnutrition. He frowned. "Were you working while you were sick?" Elena looked away. "I thought it was just a cold. The doctor says you've probably been sick for weeks." "I couldn't afford to stop." "What would have happened if you took time off?" She hesitated. "My rent was already behind. The electricity bill, too." I kept thinking, if I could just finish one more week. Her voice trailed off. Sophia quietly rested her head against her mother's arm. Dominic suddenly understood something that no employment record could ever reveal. Elena hadn't been choosing work over health. She'd been choosing between illness and homelessness. There had never really been a choice. His eyes drifted around the small hospital room. The flowers on the windowsill had wilted days ago. The blanket covering Elena's legs had clearly been repaired several times. Even the suitcase beside the bed had broken zippers held together with safety pins. Everything she owned had been used until it couldn't possibly be used anymore. Yet nowhere did he see self-pity, only quiet endurance. "You've raised Sophia alone?" Elena nodded, since she was a baby. "Her father?" A shadow crossed her face. "He left." She answered simply, "It was better that way." Dominic didn't press further. He had learned long ago that pain often revealed itself when people felt safe enough, not when they were questioned. A doctor entered the room carrying a tablet. "You must be Ms. Ruiz's family." Dominic answered before Elena could. "We're here for her." The doctor reviewed several test results before sighing. "The antibiotics are working. That's the good news. But she needs several weeks of recovery. No strenuous work. No heavy lifting. No stress." Elena almost laughed. "I clean for a living." The doctor gave her an apologetic smile. "Then you'll need to stay away from work." "I can't." "You must. I'll lose everything." Dominic spoke calmly. "No." Both the doctor and Elena turned toward him. "You won't." She stared at him, confused. "You don't understand. I've already missed shifts." "I know. My daughter." "I know. I can't accept charity." His answer came without hesitation. "This isn't charity. It's responsibility." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Dominic looked directly into her eyes. "You spent nearly 6 years helping care for one of my properties. You did your work honestly. You earned respect long before we met." He reached into his coat pocket and removed a simple business card. "There will be no termination. Your position is secure. You'll receive your full salary during your recovery." Elena's eyes widened. "I can't let you do that." "You can. And when you return," he continued, "you'll work fewer hours, with higher pay. We'll arrange childcare for Sophia. You'll never have to choose between your daughter and your job again." For several seconds, Elena simply stared at him. Then tears slowly rolled down her cheeks. Not loud sobs, not dramatic emotion, just the silent tears of someone who had spent too many years believing no one was coming to help. Sophia looked back and forth between them. "Does this mean Mommy won't get fired?" Dominic smiled gently. "No, your mother won't lose her job. Not because she got sick. Not ever." The little girl threw her arms around her mother's neck, laughing through happy tears. Watching them, Dominic quietly stepped toward the window, giving them a moment that belonged only to the two of them. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. For the first time in years, Elena Ruiz's future no longer looked like another storm waiting on the horizon. She didn't know it yet, and Dominic had no intention of telling her. Before leaving the hospital that afternoon, he would quietly settle every medical bill, pay off her overdue rent, arrange a recovery nurse, and establish an education fund for Sophia. Not because he wanted gratitude, not because he expected anything in return, but because somewhere between a little girl's trembling words and a mother's unwavering dignity, he had remembered the kind of man he had once hoped to become. 3 weeks passed before Elena Ruiz returned to Marchetti Estate. The pneumonia had loosened its grip, though not completely. Her strength came back in careful pieces. The cough still lingered on cold mornings, and climbing stairs left her breathless. But she refused to complain. Every day she grew a little stronger, driven by the same quiet determination that had carried her through years of hardship. When the black town car arrived outside her apartment building on her first morning back, she stared at it in confusion. "There must be some mistake," she told the driver. "There isn't, Ms. Ruiz," he replied politely. "Mr. Marchetti requested that transportation be provided until you're fully recovered. I can take the bus." "I'm afraid I was instructed not to leave without you." Elena sighed softly. That man, she thought. She still didn't know what to make of Dominic Marchetti. She had expected favors to come with conditions. Every difficult lesson life had taught her insisted they always did. Yet weeks had passed. No phone calls demanding repayment. No inappropriate invitations. No reminders that she owed him anything. Only kindness. That unsettled her more than anything else. Sophia practically skipped down the apartment steps wearing a new backpack, almost as large as she was. "Can we ride in the fancy car again?" Elena smiled despite herself, only because someone was generous enough to send it. Sophia climbed into the back seat, beside her mother. "I think Mr. Dominic likes helping people." Elena looked out the window. Maybe. She wasn't ready to believe that yet. People didn't simply change. At least, not in her experience. The estate looked exactly as she remembered it. Tall wrought iron gates. Perfectly trimmed gardens. The sprawling stone mansion standing like something from another century. Only this time, something felt different. As soon as she stepped through the employee entrance, Maria hurried over and embraced her warmly. "Oh, Elena, we've missed you." "I've missed all of you, too." Maria held her at arm's length. "You look healthier." "I feel better. And before you say anything, Maria interrupted with a knowing smile. Yes, we all know about the schedule. Elena blinked. What schedule? Maria laughed. You really haven't looked? Confused, Elena walked toward the staff office where the weekly assignments were posted. Her name appeared exactly where she expected, but the hours didn't. Instead of 12-hour shifts 6 days a week, she was scheduled for 6-hour shifts, 4 days each week. The salary printed beside her name hadn't been reduced. It had increased. She read it again, certain she'd misunderstood. Then a third time. Still impossible. There has to be a mistake. The estate manager, Mr. Wallace, overheard her. There isn't. He handed her a sealed envelope. These are your new employment terms. Elena opened it carefully. The letter was brief. Reduced hours, increased salary, comprehensive medical coverage, paid vacation, paid sick leave, a retirement plan, education assistance for dependent children. She stared at the page in disbelief. I don't understand. Mr. Wallace smiled. Neither did the accounting department. He insisted anyway. He, the boss. Elena looked up sharply. He personally approved every change. Why? Wallace shrugged. You'll have to ask him. But she already knew she probably never would, because asking would make it feel like a debt, and she wasn't sure she could bear hearing the answer. That afternoon, she cleaned only the West Wing instead of the entire estate. Halfway through her shift, she realized something else. Someone had replaced every old cleaning cart with lightweight equipment. The heavy industrial vacuum she had struggled to push for years was gone. In its place stood a modern cordless model that weighed almost nothing. The chemical bottles she once carried in large buckets had been replaced with ergonomic spray containers. Even the mop handles had adjustable grips designed to reduce strain. She ran her fingers across the new equipment. Someone had thought about the people who actually used it. Maria noticed her expression. He had the entire maintenance department test different models. For cleaners? Maria nodded. He asked which ones would hurt our backs the least. Elena looked around the room. Why would he care? Maria smiled. I think he's learning. Learning. The word lingered in Elena's mind for the rest of the afternoon. Meanwhile, downstairs in the estate library, Dominic reviewed contracts that had accumulated during his weeks of distraction. His attorney paused midway through a presentation. You're not listening. I am. No. The attorney closed a folder. You've read the same paragraph 4 times. Dominic leaned back in his chair. What you need? I need the man who once noticed accounting errors before accountants did. Dominic allowed himself a faint smile. He'll return. I'm beginning to wonder. Before Dominic could answer, a small knock sounded against the open library door. Sophia peeked around the corner. Am I interrupting? The attorney looked from the little girl to Dominic before quietly gathering his papers. I suddenly remembered another appointment. Within seconds, he had disappeared. Sophia stepped inside. She held a drawing folded behind her back. Hi. Hello. My mom said I should thank you again. You already did. I know, but this is different. She walked over and handed him the paper. Dominic unfolded it carefully. Drawn in bright crayons was a picture of 3 people standing beneath an enormous yellow sun. One was obviously Elena. The smallest was Sophia. The tallest wore a blue suit with dark hair. Above them, written in uneven letters, were the words, Thank you for helping my MOM. Dominic looked at the drawing for a long moment. I like your artwork. Sophia grinned. I'm getting better. I can tell. She glanced toward the bookshelf. Can I ask you something? You usually do. She giggled. Were you always serious? The question caught him completely off guard. What makes you think I'm serious? You don't smile very much. I've smiled twice. Exactly. Dominic laughed quietly before he could stop himself. There. Sophia pointed triumphantly. That makes 3. For reasons he couldn't explain, laughing around her felt effortless. There were no negotiations, no hidden motives, no danger, just honest conversation. What are you reading? She asked, climbing carefully into one of the leather chairs. He turned the book so she could see the cover. A history book. Is it fun? Not particularly. Then why read it? He considered the question. Because understanding yesterday sometimes helps us make tomorrow better. She nodded thoughtfully. My teacher says books are like borrowing someone else's brain. Dominic smiled again. Your teacher sounds wise. I think you like her. Across the hallway, Gabriel watched through the partially open door. Another guard stepped beside him. Is that the boss? Gabriel nodded. I've worked for him 15 years. I've never seen him laugh twice in one afternoon. Neither had Gabriel. Later that evening, as employees prepared to leave, Elena finished storing her cleaning supplies. She noticed Dominic standing alone in the entrance hall, watching workers head home. One elderly groundskeeper struggled to lift a heavy toolbox. Before anyone else reacted, Dominic walked over, picked it up himself, and carried it to the man's truck. The groundskeeper looked completely stunned. So was everyone else. Dominic simply handed back the toolbox and wished him a good evening. No speeches, no audience, no expectation of praise. Just a small act of kindness. Elena observed the moment from a distance. It would have been easy to dismiss it as a performance, except there had been no one important watching. Only employees, ordinary people, people whose names powerful men rarely bothered to learn. As Dominic turned toward the mansion, his eyes briefly met hers. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then he gave the smallest nod. "How was your first day back?" She smiled. "It was lighter. I'm glad." "Thank you." He hesitated. "You've thanked me enough." "No." She shook her head gently. "I don't think I have." Before he could respond, Sophia came running across the courtyard, carrying a dandelion she had picked near the garden path. She stopped in front of Dominic and held it up proudly. "This is for you." He looked at the tiny yellow flower. No one had ever offered him something worth so little that somehow meant so much. He accepted it as though she had handed him something priceless. "Thank you, Sophia." She beamed. "My teacher says flowers make people happier." Dominic looked down at the fragile bloom resting in his hand. For years, people had given him expensive watches, rare wines, luxury cars, and priceless artwork. None of them had ever made him smile the way a child's simple dandelion did. As Elena watched him tuck the flower carefully into the inside pocket of his coat instead of throwing it away, she realized something she hadn't expected. The city's most feared man wasn't pretending to become kinder. He was remembering how. Autumn settled quietly over the city, painting the trees outside the Marchetti estate in shades of amber and crimson. Life had begun to find a rhythm neither Elena nor Sophia had dared hope for. For the first time in years, Elena returned home before sunset. She helped Sophia with homework instead of collapsing into bed from exhaustion. They shared dinner at their tiny kitchen table, laughing over stories from school and work. The apartment still wasn't luxurious, but it no longer felt like a place they were barely surviving. It felt like a home. Dominic never inserted himself into their lives. His kindness remained quiet, practical, almost invisible. Every Friday, fresh groceries somehow appeared at the neighborhood food pantry, just as supplies ran low. The apartment building's broken heating system was suddenly repaired after years of complaints. The playground across the street received new swings and freshly painted benches. Whenever Elena asked around, no one knew who had paid for any of it. But somehow, she suspected, Dominic denied every question with the same calm answer. Sometimes good things simply happen. She never believed him. Neither did Sophia. "Mr. Dominic's a terrible liar," she whispered one evening. Elena laughed. "Why do you say that?" "Because every time he says he didn't do something nice." He smiles. Life, for the first time in a very long while, felt peaceful. Then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, the past knocked on Elena's apartment door. She wasn't expecting visitors. Sophia was coloring quietly at the kitchen table, while Elena folded freshly washed laundry. The knock came again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. When Elena opened the door, the color drained from her face. A tall man stood in the hallway, wearing an expensive leather jacket that couldn't hide years of hard living. Dark stubble covered his jaw, and a thin scar stretched across one cheek. His smile carried the familiar arrogance she had prayed never to see again. "Hello, Elena." She instinctively stepped backward. "Victor." Sophia looked up from the table. "Mom." Elena immediately positioned herself between her daughter and the doorway. "What are you doing here?" Victor shrugged casually. "Took me a while to find you. I've been looking." "You shouldn't have." He chuckled. "That's no way to greet your husband. We're divorced. On paper. In my heart." He smiled wider. "You'll always be mine." Elena felt her stomach tighten. "You need to leave." Instead of answering, Victor leaned sideways just enough to see around her. His eyes landed on Sophia. For several long seconds, he simply stared. "So, that's my daughter." Sophia frowned. She whispered quietly, "Mom, who's that?" Elena's heart broke. She had always known this day might come. She had just hoped it never would. Victor heard the question. His smile disappeared. "She doesn't know me?" No, you never told her? You disappeared before she learned to walk. His expression darkened. I sent money. You sent one birthday card. And $50. 7 years ago. Silence settled between them. Victor looked around the apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, comfortable, safe. Then his eyes landed on the new refrigerator, the repaired furniture, the children's books lining the shelf. He noticed things, calculated things. You've done well. We're managing. Cleaning houses pays as much now. Elena didn't answer. Victor leaned closer. I heard interesting rumors. What rumors? That some very powerful man has taken an interest in you. She froze. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out several photographs. They showed Dominic driving Elena home after work. Another showed him kneeling beside Sophia in the estate garden. One captured the three of them leaving the hospital weeks earlier. Someone had been watching. Victor dropped the photographs onto the floor. So, the famous Dominic Marchetti. I had no idea your boss was at Dominic Marchetti. Elena suddenly understood. He hadn't returned because of Sophia. He had returned because of Dominic. You've been following us. I've been doing research. You stay away from my daughter. Our daughter. You lost that right years ago. Victor laughed. No, I simply stopped using it. He stepped closer until only inches separated them. Tell me, does Marchetti know everything? Does he know why you left? Does he know what really happened? Elena's voice became ice. Leave. Victor looked toward Sophia again. I think it's time I got to know my little girl. No, I'll file for visitation. You abandoned her. I'll say you kept her from me. It won't work. We'll see. He smiled one last time before walking away. I'll be in touch. The hallway felt strangely cold after he disappeared. Elena quickly locked every lock on the door before sliding to the floor. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. Sophia hurried over. Nom. Are you okay? Elena wrapped her daughter tightly in her arms. Yes, it was a lie. No matter what happens. I love you. I know. Sophia hugged her harder. I love you too. The following morning, Dominic was reviewing estate finances when Gabriel entered carrying a thin manila folder. You want to see this? Dominic looked up. What is it? A background report. On whom? Victor Ruiz. The name meant nothing. Yet, Gabriel laid several surveillance photographs across the desk. Dominic immediately recognized Elena, then Sophia, then the man standing outside their apartment. He approached them yesterday. Dominic's expression hardened. Explain. Gabriel summarized everything they had learned overnight. Victor Ruiz, 38 years old, several arrests, domestic assault allegations that never reached trial after witnesses disappeared, unpaid debts, illegal gambling, fraud investigations, no steady employment, and a biological father suddenly interested in a daughter he hadn't seen since infancy. Dominic slowly closed the folder. What does he want? Gabriel answered without hesitation. Money. You sure? He started asking questions about you weeks ago. Dominic wasn't surprised. Predators recognize opportunity. And Elena? Terrified. He remained silent for several moments. Finally, he asked, has he contacted a lawyer? Gabriel nodded. This morning. Dominic stood and walked toward the window overlooking the gardens where Sophia often played after school. Children deserve certainty, not fear, not courtrooms, not fathers who remember they existed only when money entered the picture. Gabriel waited. He knew exactly what Dominic was thinking. One phone call, one order. Victor Ruiz would disappear forever. No trial, no custody hearing, no more problem. Instead, Dominic quietly asked, what attorney is Elena using? Gabriel blinked. You're not handling this yourself? Dominic remembered Elena's words in the hospital. People deserve dignity, not dependency. He picked up his coat. No, we're going to ask what she wants. That evening, Elena arrived at the estate looking more exhausted than she had after recovering from pneumonia. Dominic met her in the library. She tried to apologize before he could speak. I'm sorry this is becoming your problem. It already became mine the day a little girl walked into my office carrying a spray bottle. Tears filled her eyes. He wants custody. I know. He won't stop. I know. He'll use you. I know. She looked down at her trembling hands. I don't have enough money to fight him. Dominic gently placed a business card on the table. It belonged to one of the city's finest family law attorneys. Meet with her tomorrow. I can't afford. You don't need to. I can't let you pay. You aren't. She looked at him, confused. The legal fees have already been donated anonymously to a family assistance foundation. A tiny smile appeared despite everything. You planned that answer. I anticipated your objection. For the first time since Victor had returned, Elena laughed softly, only for a second, but it was enough. Outside the library windows, the first drops of rain began to fall. Inside, however, a different storm had already arrived. Victor Ruiz wasn't simply demanding parental rights. He was threatening to destroy the fragile family they had slowly begun to build, and none of them yet realized just how far he was willing to go. The next morning, the city woke beneath a sky the color of cold steel. Rain tapped softly against the windows of Dominic Marchetti's study. But inside the mansion, another storm was already brewing. Gabriel stood across from Dominic's desk, a thin folder resting in his hands. Our people tracked Victor all night, he reported. He's staying at a motel near the river. 2 of his gambling debts came due this week. He owes money to 3 different people. Dominic remained silent. He also met with a private investigator yesterday. Gabriel continued. He's collecting photographs, financial records, anything connecting you to Elena. Still, Dominic said nothing. Gabriel finally asked a question that had been hanging in the room since Victor had reappeared. Do you want him gone? In their world, those 4 words had only one meaning, one order. One night, by sunrise, Victor Ruiz would simply disappear. There would be no custody hearing, no threats, no blackmail, no danger. Gabriel had carried out orders like that before. He would carry out another without hesitation. Dominic slowly closed the folder. No. Gabriel looked surprised. No. We're doing this legally. Gabriel hesitated. Boss, with respect, men like Victor don't stop. I know. They mistake mercy for weakness. I know. They'll keep pushing until someone pushes back. Dominic stood and walked toward the rain-covered windows. I spent half my life believing every problem could be solved by making someone disappear. He looked down at the gardens where gardeners quietly worked despite the drizzle. It solved the problem. But it never solved me. Gabriel understood. This wasn't about Victor. It was about the man Dominic was trying to become. Later that afternoon, Elena arrived at the estate carrying a worn leather folder filled with documents, medical records, employment history, school reports, rent receipts. Every piece of paper she'd spent years carefully protecting. She looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. Dominic met her in the library, where the fire burned quietly despite the mild autumn weather. She placed the folder on the table. I've never been inside a courtroom. You won't be alone. She nodded but didn't look convinced. I'm afraid. I know. I'm not afraid for me. She looked toward the family photograph still sitting on Dominic's bookshelf. I'm afraid for Sophia. If Victor gets even partial custody. Her voice broke. He doesn't know her favorite bedtime story. He doesn't know she's allergic to strawberries. He doesn't know she still sleeps with the stuffed rabbit my mother sewed before she died. A tear slipped down her cheek. He doesn't know anything. Dominic handed her a handkerchief. He'll have to explain that to a judge. She gave a small, grateful smile. You make everything sound simple. It isn't. No. He sat across from her. But truth usually is. A gentle knock interrupted them. The attorney Gabriel had recommended stepped inside. Rebecca Lawson had spent nearly 25 years practicing family law, and unlike many lawyers who grew comfortable speaking in probabilities, she preferred facts. She shook Elena's hand warmly before opening a thick case file. I've reviewed everything. She looked toward Dominic. Your involvement complicates things. I assumed it would. Victor's attorney will argue that Elena is exposing her daughter to organized crime. Elena lowered her eyes. I was afraid of that. Rebecca nodded, which means our strategy cannot depend on Mr. Marchetti's influence. It must depend on evidence. She began organizing documents across the table. Employment records, school attendance, medical history, witness statements. She looked at Elena. You've raised Sophia alone for 7 years. Yes. You've maintained stable employment. Yes. You've never been investigated for neglect. No. You've never denied Victor access after you requested it. Elena's expression hardened. He never requested it. Rebecca made another note. Good. She turned toward Dominic. I have one request. Name it. Stay out of the courtroom until absolutely necessary. Gabriel frowned. Why? Because Victor wants this to become Dominic Marchetti versus an absent father. She tapped the folder. I intend to make it about a devoted mother versus an absent father. Dominic nodded immediately. If that's what gives Elena the best chance. It is. Then that's what we'll do. Elena looked at him in surprise. You'd stay away? If that's what you need. She studied him quietly. Months ago, she had imagined powerful men demanded to control every situation. Yet here sat one of the most powerful men she had ever met, choosing to step back, choosing not to make himself the center of the fight. Rebecca closed the folder. I'll file our response tomorrow. After she left, silence settled over the library. Elena finally spoke. Can I ask you something? You usually can. Why are you doing all this? Dominic looked into the flames dancing inside the fireplace. When I was about Sophia's age, he paused. My mother used to tell me that the easiest choice isn't always the right one. I didn't listen. For a very long time. And now, he smiled faintly. I'm trying to catch up. Elena folded her hands together. You know, I was angry when I first learned who you really were. He didn't seem surprised. I told myself I should keep Sophia away from you. That would have been understandable. But then, she laughed softly through her nerves. I kept watching how you treated people when you thought nobody was looking. The gardeners, the cooks, the drivers. Maria, you never embarrassed anyone. You never reminded people they owed you. She looked directly at him. That's not the man people describe on television. Dominic looked down for a moment. People usually describe the worst thing you've ever done. And sometimes, they're right. Before Elena could answer, hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway. Sophia burst into the library carrying a sheet of paper. Mom! She stopped abruptly when she noticed everyone watching. Oh, I'm sorry. Rebecca had left, but Gabriel still stood near the door. It's okay, Elena said. What is it? Sophia proudly held up a drawing. It showed 3 people standing in front of a courthouse. Above them, she'd written in careful block letters, "The good guys tell the truth." Dominic stared at the picture. So that's your plan? Sophia nodded confidently. My teacher says you don't have to remember the truth, because it's already true. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Dominic knelt until he was eye level with her. Your teacher is very wise. Sophia smiled. So, we're going to win? Dominic glanced toward Elena. She gave the smallest nod. He looked back at the little girl. We're going to tell the truth. And sometimes, he gently folded her drawing. That's the hardest road. But it's also the strongest one. Outside, the rain finally began to clear and a narrow beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the library floor. For the first time since Victor had returned, none of them knew what the judge would decide. But they all knew one thing. When the battle began, they would walk into that courtroom carrying something Victor Ruiz never could. The truth. The courthouse stood beneath a pale autumn sky, its stone columns rising above the restless crowd gathered outside. Reporters lined the front steps, cameras balanced on their shoulders, hoping for a glimpse of the infamous Dominic Marchetti. Word had spread quickly that one of the city's most powerful men might be connected to an ordinary custody hearing. Dominic had anticipated the spectacle. That was why he never stepped out of the black sedan. Instead, he remained inside with Gabriel, while watching Elena and Rebecca Lawson walk confidently through the courthouse entrance. This is her fight, Dominic said quietly. Gabriel nodded. And if she needs you, I'll be there. But only if she asks. Inside Courtroom 4, the atmosphere felt heavy with anticipation. The polished wooden benches creaked beneath whispered conversations. Families sat waiting for their own cases, though many quietly glanced toward Elena after recognizing the television cameras outside. Elena adjusted the sleeve of her navy blazer and took a slow breath. Rebecca leaned toward her. Remember what we talked about. I know. We don't fight Victor. We tell the truth. Elena nodded. The courtroom door opened once more. Victor Ruiz walked in wearing an expensive charcoal suit that looked newer than anything he had owned years before. He smiled confidently at the people around him, stopping twice to shake hands with reporters he had apparently invited himself. When his eyes met Elena's, his smile widened, as if this were already over. The bailiff called the room to order. Everyone stood as Judge Miriam Holloway entered. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades separating emotion from evidence. Once everyone was seated, she looked over the case file. We're here regarding the petition of Victor Ruiz requesting joint custody and visitation rights concerning the minor child, Sofia Ruiz. Her eyes moved toward Victor. Mr. Ruiz, your attorney may begin. Victor's lawyer rose confidently. He painted the picture they had expected. A father who'd been unfairly kept away from his daughter. A man who had finally rebuilt his life. Someone eager to reconnect with the child he loved. He implied that Elena had deliberately hidden Sofia for years while exposing her to dangerous people connected to organized crime. More than once, his gaze drifted toward the empty seat where Dominic might have been sitting. Rebecca remained perfectly calm. She made no objections. She simply took notes. When Victor himself was called to testify, he spoke with practiced emotion. I never stopped loving my daughter. He lowered his eyes dramatically. I searched for them for years. My financial struggles made it difficult, but I've changed. I want to be part of her life. He even wiped away what appeared to be a tear. Several people in the gallery exchanged sympathetic glances. Then Rebecca stood. She approached the witness stand carrying only a thin folder. Mr. Ruiz, she began pleasantly, you testified that you've searched for your daughter for years. Yes. You also stated you wanted to support her. Absolutely. Rebecca opened the folder. Would you please explain why there are no child support payments on record? Victor hesitated. I paid cash. Interesting. She lifted another document. The state has no record of a single payment. She placed it before him. Can you point to one? Victor remained silent. Rebecca continued. You told this court you've searched tirelessly. She displayed another page. Would you explain why your employer's records show you worked less than 3 miles from Elena's apartment for 11 consecutive months? Victor shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know she lived there. Rebecca nodded. But you just testified you were searching. Silence. She walked slowly back toward the evidence table. You've also described yourself as a loving father. She lifted a school enrollment form. Can you tell the court Sofia's birthday? Victor answered immediately. April 15th. Rebecca looked at the judge. Her birthday is April 14th. Victor swallowed. It was a mistake. Rebecca didn't respond. Instead, she held up another document. What elementary school does she attend? He hesitated. I don't remember the name. What grade is she in? Silence. What food allergy does she have? Nothing. Rebecca's voice remained gentle. You don't know because you've never asked. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter. She wasn't attacking him. She was simply removing one lie after another until nothing remained beneath them. Then she introduced photographs, not of Dominic, of Elena, working, picking Sofia up from school, attending parent-teacher meetings, sleeping beside a hospital bed during childhood illnesses, birthday parties, science fairs, Christmas mornings. 7 years of ordinary moments that quietly proved extraordinary devotion. When Elena testified, she never once insulted Victor. She answered every question honestly. Yes, she had been afraid of him. Yes, he had disappeared. No, she had never prevented him from contacting their daughter because he had never tried. When asked why she hadn't spoken badly about Victor to Sofia, Elena looked toward the judge. Because children shouldn't carry their parents' failures. They deserve to make their own conclusions. Even Victor lowered his eyes. Then Rebecca made one final request. Your Honor, we'd like permission for Sofia Ruiz to speak. The judge looked thoughtful. Only if she's comfortable. A side door opened. Sofia walked into the courtroom, holding the stuffed rabbit her grandmother had sewn years before. She wasn't dressed formally. Just a simple blue dress with neatly braided hair. She looked impossibly small inside such a large room. Rebecca knelt beside her. You don't have to answer anything you don't understand. Sofia nodded. The judge smiled kindly. Hello, Sofia. Hi. Do you know why you're here today? So grown-ups can decide where I live. The judge nodded gently. And where do you want to live? Sofia looked toward her mother without hesitation. With Mommy. Can you tell me why? The little girl thought carefully before answering. Because she's always there. Simple. Honest. The courtroom remained silent. Sofia continued. When I get scared at night, Mommy stays awake. When I'm sick, Mommy holds my hand. When I forget my homework, she brings it to school. Her tiny fingers tightened around the stuffed rabbit. I don't really know that man. She glanced briefly toward Victor. He says he's my dad. But being somebody's dad... She paused. searching for the right words. My teacher says loving people is something you do, not just something you say. Several people quietly wiped their eyes. Even the court reporter paused for a moment before continuing to type. Then Sophia reached into her backpack. I brought something. She unfolded a crayon drawing. It showed 3 figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. One was clearly Elena. One was Sophia. The third wore a dark suit. She handed it to the judge. I made this because families help each other. The judge studied the picture. Who's this gentleman? Sophia smiled. Mr. Dominic. Is he your father? No. She shook her head. But... Another pause. He always shows up. No one looked toward the empty chair where Dominic would have been. They didn't have to. Those 4 words said everything. After a brief recess, Judge Holloway returned with her decision. The purpose of this court is not to reward biology. It is to protect the best interests of the child. She looked directly at Victor. Parenthood requires consistent love, sacrifice, and responsibility. Mr. Ruiz, the evidence demonstrates years of abandonment followed by sudden interest motivated by circumstances that have little to do with your daughter's well-being. She turned toward Elena. Ms. Ruiz, this court finds that you provided a safe, stable, and loving home under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Her gavel struck once. The petition for joint custody is denied. Ms. Elena Ruiz is awarded full legal and physical custody of Sophia Ruiz. A quiet sob escaped Elena before she covered her mouth. Sophia threw her arms around her mother. Rebecca smiled for the first time all day. Outside, reporters rushed to file their stories. Inside, Elena held her daughter as though she would never let go again. For one beautiful moment, truth had spoken louder than fear, and it had been enough. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the weight of what happened lingered in the air. Elena remained seated on the wooden bench for a long moment, her arms wrapped around Sophia, who still clutched the stuffed rabbit against her chest. Rebecca quietly gathered the case files, giving them a few precious minutes alone. You did it, Mommy, Sophia whispered. Elena kissed the top of her daughter's head. No, sweetheart. We did it. Sophia looked up with a puzzled smile, and Mr. Dominic helped too. Elena's eyes softened. Yes, he did. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded behind metal barricades, shouting questions at anyone willing to answer. Ms. Ruiz, how do you feel after the ruling? Is Dominic Marchetti supporting your family? Did organized crime influence today's decision? Rebecca stepped out first and firmly guided the reporters back. No statements today. This case was about a child. Please respect the court's decision. Meanwhile, Dominic remained inside his sedan parked across the street. He had watched people enter the courthouse that morning. Now he watched them leave. Gabriel sat behind the wheel. It's over, he said quietly. It should be. Dominic nodded. But something doesn't feel finished. Years of surviving in dangerous circles had sharpened instincts that rarely failed him. He scanned the sidewalks, the parked cars, the rooftops, the people pretending not to watch. Then his eyes narrowed. Across the street, partially hidden beside a newspaper stand, stood Victor Ruiz. He no longer looked defeated. He looked empty. His expensive suit jacket hung open despite the cold. His shoulders were rigid. One hand remained buried inside the pocket of the jacket. Gabriel noticed him at the same moment. I see him. Dominic opened the car door. Stay here. Gabriel immediately objected. Boss! Stay with the vehicle. Before Gabriel could argue again, Dominic had already crossed the street. He wasn't walking toward Victor to threaten him. He simply wanted to ensure Elena and Sophia reached their car safely. Rebecca emerged from the courthouse first. Behind her came Elena holding Sophia's hand. The little girl laughed at something her mother whispered. It was the first carefree sound Dominic had heard from her all day. He smiled. Then everything changed. Victor stepped away from the newspaper stand. His face twisted with bitterness that consumed every trace of reason. You think you've won? His voice echoed across the courthouse steps. People turned. Reporters instinctively lifted their cameras. Elena froze. Victor, it's over, Rebecca called firmly. Go home. Victor ignored her. His eyes locked onto Dominic. This is your fault. Dominic kept his voice calm. No, you made your own choices. Victor laughed. You stole everything. No, I protected what you abandoned. Those words struck harder than any punch. Victor's breathing became uneven. His hands slowly emerged from inside his jacket. Metal caught the afternoon sunlight. A handgun. Someone screamed. The courthouse steps exploded into panic. Reporters dropped cameras. People scattered in every direction. Gabriel burst from the sedan, already reaching beneath his own jacket. Gun! His warning came almost simultaneously, with Victor raising the weapon. Time seemed to fracture. Dominic saw the barrel turning toward him. He knew he couldn't reach cover in time. He also knew Gabriel was too far away. Everything narrowed to a single terrifying second. Then Elena moved, without hesitation, without calculation. She released Sophia's hand and ran. Dominic. The sound of her voice barely left her lips before she threw herself between him and Victor. The gunshot shattered the afternoon. For one impossible heartbeat. No one moved. Then Elena gasped. Her body stiffened. A dark stain slowly spread across the side of her cream-colored coat. Dominic caught her just before she struck the courthouse steps. No! Her knees gave way completely. He lowered her gently onto the stone pavement. Blood stained his hands almost instantly. Elena! Her breathing came in shallow, painful bursts. Sophia screamed, "Mommy!" Rebecca caught the little girl before she could run into the chaos. Police officers rushed forward. Someone tackled Victor to the ground. The handgun slid across the concrete. Sirens echoed in the distance. But Dominic heard none of it. His world had shrunk to the woman lying in his arms. "Stay with me?" She tried to smile. "I tried." "You don't talk. Save your strength." He pressed both hands firmly against the wound, trying desperately to slow the bleeding. His expensive black coat became soaked with crimson. "It hurts." "I know. I'm sorry." "No." His voice broke for the first time in decades. "You have nothing to apologize for." She looked towards Sophia. "Our daughter." "Take care." "You will." "No." Her fingers weakly searched until they found his wrist. "If I..." "Don't." He leaned closer. "Don't say it." Her eyes met his, filled not with fear, but with astonishing peace. "You promised." "I know." "No revenge." Dominic's jaw tightened. Several feet away, Victor struggled violently beneath two police officers. "You ruined my life." He shouted, "I should have killed you." Those words ignited something old, something buried, something Dominic had fought for months to leave behind. He slowly stood. Blood still covered his hands. Every instinct he had ever developed demanded one thing. End it. Walk across those few feet. Ignore the police. Ignore the cameras. Ignore the consequences. Just once. One movement. One life. Justice of his own making. Gabriel recognized the look immediately. He had seen it years ago. The expression Dominic wore before men disappeared forever. He stepped forward carefully. "Boss!" No response. Dominic kept walking. Victor noticed him approaching. For the first time all afternoon, fear appeared in his eyes. The crowd fell silent. Police officers instinctively shifted their stance. No one doubted what could happen next. Then, a weak voice stopped him. "Dominic." He turned. Elena had somehow remained conscious. She looked impossibly fragile, lying against the cold courthouse steps. Tears rolled silently down her face. "Please." Her voice barely carried across the distance. "Sophia needs." She struggled for breath. "A man, not." Another painful breath. "A monster." The word struck him harder than the bullet ever could. Every memory flooded back at once. A little girl standing in his office, holding a spray bottle. A mother working herself into illness to protect her child. A crayon drawing that read, "The good guys tell the truth." A dandelion tucked inside his coat. Sophia's tiny voice saying, "He always shows up." If he killed Victor now, what would Sophia remember? Not the man who protected her. Not the man who chose kindness. She would remember another man who answered pain with violence. Dominic closed his eyes. The rage still burned inside him. But for the first time in his life, it did not control him. When he opened them again, he slowly stepped backward. He raised both blood-covered hands where the police could see them. "Arrest him." His voice was steady. "He'll answer for this." Victor stared in disbelief. "You won't do it?" Dominic looked at him with an expression colder than hatred. "No. You no longer get to decide the kind of man I become." The distant wail of an ambulance grew louder until it finally pulled onto the courthouse plaza. Paramedics rushed toward Elena with a stretcher. As they carefully lifted her aboard, she reached weakly for Dominic's hand one final time. He held it tightly. "I'll be here," he whispered. "No matter what." Her fingers gently squeezed his before exhaustion finally overcame her. The ambulance doors closed. As it sped away through the crowded streets, Dominic stood motionless beneath the gray afternoon sky. For years, people had feared him because of the lives he could take. But on that day, the greatest battle he ever fought was against the darkness inside himself. And for the first time, he won. The next 72 hours felt like the longest of Dominic Marchetti's life. For a man who had survived gang wars, assassination attempts, and betrayals from people he had once called brothers, nothing had ever made him feel as powerless as sitting outside an operating room. The bright hospital corridor seemed painfully quiet. Every few minutes, a doctor or nurse hurried past without stopping. Every time the operating room doors moved, Dominic stood. Every time they closed again, hope slipped a little further away. Gabriel remained nearby, but wisely said very little. Some battles required silence. Sophia sat curled beside Dominic, wrapped in a blanket one of the nurses had given her. Her stuffed rabbit rested in her lap, but she wasn't playing with it. She simply stared at the operating room doors. After what felt like an eternity, she slipped her small hand into Dominic's. "She's gonna wake up." He looked down. "You sound very sure." "My mom always keeps her promises." "What promise?" Sophia smiled faintly. "She promised we'd make pancakes together this Saturday." Dominic felt his throat tighten. "I guess she has to get better then." "She does." Children possessed an extraordinary kind of faith, not because they understood life, but because they believed love was stronger than fear. For the first time in many years, Dominic found himself hoping with the same simplicity. Just after midnight, the surgeon finally stepped into the hallway. Everyone rose at once. The surgery was successful. The word seemed to lift the entire corridor. The bullet narrowly missed her heart. There was significant blood loss, but she's stable. She's going to recover. Sophia burst into tears. Not frightened tears. Relieved ones. Dominic closed his eyes for a brief moment, thanking God in the only way he still knew how. Weeks passed before Elena returned home. Physical therapy was slow. The scar across her side would remain forever, and some mornings of pain reminded her how close she'd come to leaving the people she loved. Yet every new step felt like a victory. The apartment looked different when she walked through the door. Fresh flowers stood on the kitchen table. The broken bookshelf had been repaired. The walls had been repainted in warm cream colors. Even the old couch had quietly been replaced with one soft enough for her recovery. She didn't ask who had arranged it. She already knew. Dominic, however, wasn't waiting inside. He had deliberately stayed away. Not because he didn't care. Because he wanted Elena's first moments home to belong to her and Sophia. Only after they had settled in did someone knock gently at the door. Sophia raced toward it. "Mr. Dominic." She threw her arms around him before he had a chance to speak. He laughed softly, hugging her just as tightly. "I missed you too. You took forever. I was told recovering patients deserve peace." She took his hand. "We already had peace. Now come inside." Elena watched in the living room, smiling as Dominic stepped cautiously through the doorway. For a moment, neither adult spoke. Then she noticed something unusual. He wasn't wearing his expensive tailored suits. Instead, he had arrived in a simple navy sweater and dark jeans, without bodyguards, without the intimidating presence that usually followed him. Just, "Dominic, you look healthier," he said. "So do you?" She glanced toward the flowers. "You've been busy." "I don't know what you're talking about." She laughed. "You're still a terrible liar." "I've heard that." Sophia interrupted before either of them could continue. "I made cookies." Dominic looked at the slightly uneven chocolate chip cookies arranged proudly on a plate. "They look amazing. They're a little burned. They're perfect." He took one anyway. It was, in fact, slightly burned. It was also one of the best cookies he had ever tasted, because it came with a smile that couldn't be bought. Across the city, another story was reaching its conclusion. Victor Ruiz stood before a different judge. This time, there were no cameras hoping for sympathy, only evidence: attempted murder, illegal possession of a firearm, prior fraud, witness intimidation. The sentence was swift, years behind bars. As officers led him away in handcuffs, Victor looked strangely defeated, not because he had lost his freedom, because he had finally realized that every choice he had made had slowly built a prison he now entered. Meanwhile, Dominic began quietly untangling himself from another prison, one far less visible. Over the following months, people inside his organization noticed changes. Illegal businesses were sold. Legitimate companies expanded. Scholarship programs quietly appeared across neighborhoods that had long been forgotten. Employees received better health care. Former rivals found themselves offered business partnerships instead of threats. Some associates questioned whether Dominic had grown weak. Others believed he had become smarter. Only Gabriel knew the truth. His boss hadn't become weaker. He had finally become free. One spring afternoon, nearly a year after Sophia had first walked into his office, carrying a spray bottle, the three of them returned to the estate. Not because Elena worked there anymore. She had accepted Dominic's offer to oversee employee welfare and training instead of physically cleaning the mansion. It was work that valued her experience without demanding her health. Sophia ran to the gardens chasing butterflies, while Elena and Dominic walked slowly behind her. "She seems happy," Dominic said. "She is." Elena smiled. "She finally sleeps through the night." They stopped beneath the old oak tree where Sophia often played. "I've been thinking," Dominic began carefully. Elena looked at him. "I spent most of my life believing family was something you protected with fear. And now..." He watched Sophia laugh as she twirled across the grass. "Now I think family is something you earn with love." Elena reached for his hand. This time, neither of them pulled away. Just then, Sophia came running back carrying 3 dandelions. One for her mother, one for Dominic, one for herself. She looked between them thoughtfully. "My teacher says families don't always start the same way." "No," Elena agreed. "They don't." Sophia tilted her head. "Can I ask something?" "Of course," Dominic replied. She hesitated for only a second. "Would it be okay if I called you Dad someday?" The world seemed to stop. Dominic, a man who had negotiated impossible deals without hesitation, suddenly found himself unable to speak. His eyes filled before he could hide it. He knelt in front of her. "You can call me whatever makes your heart feel safe." Sophia smiled the biggest smile either of them had ever seen. She wrapped her arms around his neck. "Hi, Dad." Dominic held her close. His eyes closing as tears quietly escaped down his face. For years, powerful people had addressed him with titles meant to inspire fear. Boss, Don, Mr. Marchetti. None of them had ever meant as much as one simple word spoken by a little girl. Dad. Elena stood beside them, tears of joy shining in her eyes as she watched the family none of them had expected finally become the family they had always needed. Months later, if anyone had asked what changed Dominic Marchetti, many would have guessed it was nearly losing his life. Others would have pointed to the courtroom or the shooting outside the courthouse. They would all have been wrong. The truth was much simpler. His life had changed on an ordinary morning when a little girl, wearing an oversized cleaning apron, had walked into his office holding a spray bottle with both hands. She hadn't come asking for money. She hadn't come asking for mercy. She had only wanted to protect her mother from losing her job. That simple act of love had reached a place that years of power, wealth, and violence never could, because in the end, the most feared man in the city wasn't transformed by fear. He was transformed by compassion, not by money, not by power, not by revenge, but by a little girl who loved her mother enough to take her place at work. And sometimes, the smallest hands carry the greatest power to change a human heart.